Good morning or good afternoon. Happy Friday. It's Leadership Lunch Chat with Jen Wilson and Amy Vetter. And we're a few minutes late. Sorry about that. We were rounding up on our game plan for today, which is going to be talking about visibility and the importance of leaders, especially rising stars or high potential leaders, people that aspire to partnership or want to lead a department or become, significant leaders in the organization, how crucial it is for you to be more visible and to be more vocal. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And Amy, I'm going to let you start if you want, and we'll go from there. Oh, you're muted. Your sound is gone somehow.
Sorry about that. I was muted. I was letting you talk.
No problem.
So I think this can be something that happens at any level, but especially as we're learning just to have confidence in ourselves and in our careers and what we want and the value we want to create. I think too many times we think we have no control over our environment, over decisions that are being made, or we're afraid to speak up, thinking that we may lose our job if we speak up, or someone will brand us badly. But the worst thing that we can do is not come in and try to make the best of the workplace that we're in, and instead go home every day just feeling like you don't have control. And there is ways to be able to speak up in a way that's productive, in a way that helps and doesn't hurt, not complaining, but learn the skills to be able to influence. And influence isn't something that's done just because you have a title. You can influence at the lowest level of the organization by the actions that you take and how you guide yourself and guide conversations with grace. And so really figuring out what are the things you want to solve. And where I usually like to start with these conversations is, what is the value that you are trying to create in the first place when you go to work every day? And sometimes we're so into the work and into our careers and what level we're at and all the politics that we forget why we do what we do and what is the value we want to create. And then we can start building off where the gaps are and figuring out the ways that either what can we control and what can't we control to be able to solve those things. And then who do we need to bring into the process to ensure that we can get to where we want to go and be able to have the organization accomplish what we want the organization to accomplish as well.
Yes. Well, and so we coach a lot of future leaders and talk about this idea of visibility and vocalization. And I was just thinking while you were talking about Caroline, who runs our StreamYard, and she's here with us every time we do leadership chat. So she's part of this trio here. She just had a birthday, and for her birthday, which was Wednesday, she wrote a blog, published her first blog for us. And what she did was she went out and asked all the Convergence team, if you could go and talk to your 27-year-old self, what advice would you give? And it was so interesting. I had the privilege of editing her blog for her, and reading the advice, it was so thematic. And it was a bunch of professional women saying, I would tell my 27-year-old to trust her instincts and say what she needs to say. I would tell her to speak up and go ahead and share the opinion or the idea, that it will add value. Don't be afraid. Don't hold back. Don't lack confidence in your perception. It has value. That was almost universally what each of us wrote, even though we didn't speak to each other at all. That's what we would have said to our 27-year-old selves. And so I thought that was super interesting, just how consistent that was. And, I think one of the things to pay attention to in this whole conversation is, what are you saying to yourself in your inner dialogue that's holding you back? And when we coach leaders about speaking up, I say, I want you to picture that you're engaged in this inner conversation while you're sitting around a table of people. And it's sort of like your inner dialogue has your tongue in its hand and it's holding it. And you're fighting with yourself. And you're like, is this a good idea? Will somebody argue it? should I wait to see if someone else says it? What if somebody gets mad, like you said, Amy? Like there's this whole like back and forth wrestling match. And while you're doing that, you're not being present with the group. You're not, you don't seem engaged sometimes. And so I tell people, speak up and say what you're thinking, because then they know you're there and you're listening and you care.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, your silence isn't seen as like, well, she's just feeling her way around, or people start to say, why is he even in this meeting? He never contributes anything. And so you don't realize how your silence can be judged just as negatively as your speaking up could be judged. And you can't make change in silence. People can't follow silence. They don't know where you stand. And so they're not going to follow you. You won't have the influence if you're silent.
Yeah. And I think the hard part that I have found in the past with this is that when people are silent, sometimes they go off and complain instead of bringing up the issue in the actual meeting. And so it's important that if there's something to be solved, it's not solved by gossip. It's solved where it is a proactive, collaborative way to solve the situation. So one of the things, and I loved this, I speak to women conferences all the time, and one of the and this really applies to anyone, but this happens, since you brought up women, this happens to women a lot in meetings, is losing the idea to somebody else. So a lot of times women's voices get lost in a room. And so they don't necessarily speak up because someone else either takes the idea, they don't hear them speak up, and so forth. And so there was an article I read from the staffers during the Obama administration, and they were the women staffers. And during that session, they were like, how do we solve this? That when we have an idea, that people hear it, that we get named, that it was our idea, that someone doesn't take the idea and say it was somebody else's idea. And so what they did was decide that as soon as, if I come in and I say, I have an idea, then I have an agreement with you, Jen, for you to go right away, Amy, that's an awesome idea, across the room, and name the idea. And so a lot of times we think we have to do this alone, but it's also coming to people around us, creating a community around us of like-minded people that might be feeling like, so if you're hearing in the workplace and you're an emerging leader and feeling like everyone in that emerging leader group is feeling the same thing, like their voice isn't getting heard, or, they're not feeling like the initiatives that are important to them are happening. So how do you work together rather than work negatively, and say, how can we approach this meeting together? So we don't have to be alone when we approach that meeting. Instead, we can collaborate together and say, during this meeting, we want to make sure that the partners hear this. And whatever that is, that you're all walking in with productive conversation, and maybe even practice it, because a lot of times it's good to practice how you're going to communicate something with somebody else so they can give you feedback on how it could better be addressed, or maybe something you missed, or so forth. It's, this is the way we get better at communication, but go in together with that strategy, but not to be in the way of pushing, that you're doing it in a collaborative way, palms up, open-ended questions, but to gear toward the goal that you guys want to accomplish together and to be heard. So I think too many people try to do this by themselves and then feel like they got squashed by the people that are older in the room or have more title, because they're not approaching it in a strategic way.
Yes, I love that. And so, what I would the adjective I try to use to what part of what you were talking about there is a unity, to come in unified as a next gen leadership team. or as part of the partnership group, if you're part of the partnership group, but you're the part of the partnership group that's not being heard, or you feel like you're not, that you unify and you say, hey, we have one thing in particular we really think we need to be focusing on, or one thing we think we need to shift, and here's why. And to unify around that. And in that unity, the choir of voices is heard better than one voice. And it's a little harder to shut you down without at least fully listening. The other thing is, I see this a lot with niche leaders. So the CAS leader, any BV leader or forensics leader, or advisory group leader, if that's a small upstart program or whatever it might be, that a lot of leadership conversation around tables centers on the big service lines, tax, audit. And a lot of times the niche players kind of hang back. They don't say much. They don't observe much. And it doesn't even have to be about your practice. If you have thoughts about how this whole thing is going, and you have feelings that you would like the group to hear about ideas or just observations, sometimes because you don't have a dog in the race, your voice could be really clear ringing through the room. If you say, hey guys, I've been listening to this for quite a while and here's my observation, or, hey, every once in a while I experience this in facilitation, people that I facilitate a lot, the niche leader will say, could we just do one whole session on the niches and not even talk about audit or tax or any of the big service lines for just one whole planning session? Talk nothing else but specialties, because these guys get just so much attention and airtime. And of course, it's big revenue and it's big process and it's tying up a lot of our people. And of course, we have to focus on it. But that's another sort of silent minority or something that's out there that also tends to have a decent amount of what I'm going to call complaints, but also maybe some insights that are worthwhile to the rest of the group if they had the courage to step up and speak out.
I do think too that if you are seeking to improve the skill, there's always people around you that are leaders that you may find effective at communication, that you might look to and say, you know what, every time I'm in the room, I just feel like they handle conversations really well. I want to learn from them. And so we sometimes get assigned mentors, based on the organization, just assigning mentors, but we can look for mentors as well. And that is a really important piece of your career growth, is to find the people based on skills that you're looking for too. A mentor doesn't have to be just one person. It can be multiple people in different ways that, one of the things, I've had to watch, and I'm sure you too, Jen, is we're both extroverted in a meeting, right? So we're going to say our ideas right away. And, we're quick thinkers. So we're saying responses right away and trying to get that into the room. But if I want to be effective as an extroverted person in a meeting, I need to look for introverted people to talk to and say, how am I affecting you when I do that in a meeting? And how do I surface your voice so that I make sure that I'm not drowning that out? Because that can easily happen, because introverted people are going to go and think about things. They're not going to have the answer right away. And it's important that we give that space or even surface those people to talk, because everyone has the idea. Because if, like you said, Jen, most people will look at someone not talking as if they don't care, but a lot of people that aren't talking are still processing. And we have to understand if we are squashing that in a room and making sure that we figure out how we elevate those voices as well. So when you're looking to improve skill sets, it's not all about being in a training room. It's about looking to people that demonstrate the qualities that you're trying to improve, or gaps that you're trying to improve, and figuring out how they can give you insight into the way that they think that might make these little tweaks or little adjustments that are going to be effective in you speaking up.
Yes. And so group dynamics are real for sure. And extroverts always sort of carry the day in conversation, whether they're really invited to or not. It's a compulsion, and they're going to do it. And so for them to have that self-awareness and to hold back. Also, there's positional authority, and we always tell that the people at the highest level of positions in a room to speak last. If they say what their opinion is, positional authority will trump everybody else, and nobody steps into the void and says, well, I beg to differ, boss.
Right.
I mean, some people might, but it's pretty hard to do it. So, we always say big dog goes last, you just have to go last if we're having a conversation, but also extroverts go last. Introverts will need time to process. They'll also hold back because they don't want to talk over anybody and they won't butt in. They have a whole set of feelings often about those things. And so they'll be holding back, waiting for their entry point. And that entry point may never happen if a bunch of other people are filling the space. They leave irritated that they didn't get a word in edgewise. The extroverts feel like maybe a decision got made, but it didn't because those people weren't heard. They're not bought in. And so there's a danger in that continued group dynamic day after day, year after year, that you get fractures in the group because we don't even know each other or hear each other, because only some of us are speaking and the rest are doing it in the meeting after the meeting or in the hallway or whatever. And that's not unity. So I agree, Amy, that it's a self-facilitation. The group has to self-facilitate. And one of the ways to draw those introverts out is to ask one of them someone who doesn't speak often, a person, a few words, ask them to facilitate, so the topic can come up and then they can facilitate. The other thing is it helps processors, people that need more time to process before they have something to say, to have the agenda ahead of time, to have materials and pre-reading, as much prep, last minute, sprung on topics are better for the extroverted. They will, they'll talk, think, talk, and the thinkers need think, talk, think, so we have to figure out how to accommodate both styles.
Yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to say about this idea is that we have to be careful that we also take responsibility for asserting ourselves, that none of us is a victim in these circumstances. So if there is somebody that talks too much and I don't feel like I can get a word in edgewise, you have to go to that person one-on-one and just say, I feel like I'm having a hard time speaking up in there. And I would love it if you would literally call me into the conversation and hand me the speaking baton instead of you carrying it. Give it to me. And not like you talk too much and you're causing me not to share, which is going to cause this conflicted defensive response. But instead, just like, hey, I'm having a hard time getting in here. I need your help. Palms up, like you said, Amy. Palms up. And can you just hand me the speaking baton? And most people would gladly do that. They'll see it and they'll know that they need to back off and they will hand you the speaking baton and invite you in. And then you have to speak and have something to say.
Well, and it's interesting. I just did a session with my son's, he's on this club that I work with them as an advisor to help them with strategy. And we just did a strategy session last week. And there's some change in the executives of the club because a couple have graduated. And this is exactly what happened in the group. So even young people putting these groups together, we have a newer person come in and he was taking over for a person that was very, she just did so much, so she was very well respected with the group and he was taking over her role. And what I did with the group was have them, and this is an effective way to get quieter people to speak up or people that don't feel confident in their role yet, is have them answer questions on their own to bring to the session so that they were prepared and ready for the questions that were going to be asked. And one of the things that kept happening with this person was that they kept saying, well, I'm not so and so, I'm new, I probably don't have much to add. And I had to keep forcing that person to say what they had to say. And every time they said something, it brought on this huge discussion with the group. And I kept trying to point out to them, like, so new perspective helps a group, right? And so even if you don't completely know your role yet, and you're not 100%, we all have imposter syndrome, and you may not be the expert that somebody else was in that role, or you're still learning to be that person. Your outside perspective of being new in a role is actually very valuable to a team, and to not downplay that. So you can go in and say, I could be wrong, but this is my perspective, and I've just been doing this for a little bit, but these are some observations I have. Some of them, they might say, oh, this is because of this. Okay. But then others are saying, I didn't really think of it that way. And I didn't realize that that was important. And then it created all new conversation. And so even when you're the young person in the room or the new person in the role, your feedback is really important from day one to be giving in a room, even as you're learning, to just give that perspective that you're seeing.
Almost more important,
Yeah.
right? Like the newest person is
your-
actually the cleanest thinker, the clearest head in the room, because they're not all tainted by the past and groupthink and politics and a bunch of other junk. They're coming in cold. And I love that perspective. And I just hope more and more people will share it, especially now when we're in this massive time of change. And, really the need for business models to shift and leadership styles to shift and elevating new leaders and all of those things. It's so critical that we hear those new voices and their perspective, what they've been thinking and seeing, whether or not it totally matches with what we know. Another thought I had, this is not about you, the speaker upper. This is about the people in the room that have experience, extroverted or introverted, I don't care which. We have to be careful educating people. And so they share their ideas and we say, well, let me tell you why that won't work. Or, like in my years of experience, this is what I know to be true. And we get, well, we go into this weird, yes, they shut down the idea, but also it's like demeaning, diminishing. It turns into a weird, like too much entrenchment, too much past-based something. And so the person with the big idea or the new perspective is like, they don't want to be schooled right now. They just want to be heard. And we can figure out what to do with that input or the idea later. This isn't the time to correct it. And if you do that, everybody else around the table that has new ideas or new perspectives is going to be sort of not that excited to step in and add their voice. And I just think those of us with experience and positional leadership and louder voices, we all have to watch that. And it's hard, but it has to be done because otherwise we aren't going to have the benefit of all this innovation and all this wonderful changed thinking that we need to lead our firms and our country forward. We just have to empower that voice, that new perspective voice. So anyway, I really appreciate you processing this idea of increasing your influence and speaking up, Amy, today. And for those of you who joined us, thank you so much for that too. We come and process leadership ideas every Friday at noon Eastern. We welcome you to share any ideas you have that you'd like us to process with you in social, and contact us anytime. Thanks, and everybody have a great weekend and a great week ahead.